Your hosts have earned a reputation as fierce and effective advocates inside and outside of the courtroom. Our partners are experienced trial attorneys who have been board certified in family law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization.
All right. Thanks for tuning into For Better or Worse, or Divorce podcast. This is where we provide you tips and insight on how to navigate divorce and child custody situations. I'm Jake Gilbreath. I'm here with my partner, Brian Walters. We're the managing partners of Walters Gilbreath, and we're celebrating our 100th episode, which is wild to think about. We started this, I think, if I recall, during COVID, and now we're sitting here 100 episodes later, still really enjoying it. I hope y'all are too. As always, if you have any feedback that you want to give us or help us better the podcast, we're always looking for that. But we really appreciate y'all joining us, especially appreciate our listeners who've been here since the beginning and hopefully have seen the podcast improve over time and will continue to improve. So today we're going to recap some recent episodes, discuss current family law news, and offer a glimpse into what's ahead for our next 10 episodes. We also have some listener questions that hopefully we'll have some time to get to that we'll answer at the end. So, all right, 100 episodes in, let's talk about some recent trending topics and episodes. So, Brian, tell me about kind of the recent topics that we've covered or episodes that we've had. What's particularly stood out kind of in your mind as in the last few, say, 5 to 10 or 15 episodes that we've done?
Yeah, some of the popular ones have been the one I did with Elise Bowie, who's a divorce attorney up in Seattle, Washington, a friend of ours. She's from New Orleans originally and moved up to Seattle for complete changing in climate experience. And we talked a lot about what's similar to what we do here in Texas and in Washington, and also what's different between the two places, quite a few differences. And then also what happens if you have an issue that kind of goes beyond state boundaries, either between Texas and Washington or Texas and California or whatever. So that one seemed to be real popular. She's a fun person to talk to. I also did one with Sarah Cuddy, who's a certified divorce financial analyst and planner. And what that means is that she helps people who are going through a divorce make financial plans. That could be the spouse, sometimes both spouses, who aren't that familiar with finances and money, and now they're about to be divorced, and generally the other spouse has handled all the money, and they kind of need help getting through that. And also if they have specific needs. For example, it's not uncommon for there to be an age difference. So someone's closer to retirement, or an income difference. So someone needs more income in the short term or more access to funds in the short term versus the other one that might not. So she talked us through what she does, and we talked about some scenarios where that might be helpful. We also did a recent series on various Texas counties. We practice all over the state and all the big cities and counties, and a lot of small and medium-sized ones too, and kind of talked about the differences and similarities between each county by county, Harris County, Dallas County, Travis County, all of those, which was pretty interesting too. We did those with some of our local attorneys that work for us that are in those offices. I believe you did one with Bill Eddy recently, so you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, Bill Eddy writes some of my favorite books, and testified court cases as an expert. He presents throughout the nation, really, both on parental alienation and co-parenting issues. He writes the book where he talks about BIF communication. For those of y'all who remember from prior episodes, BIF communication is the brief, informative, friendly, and firm style of communication that he recommends for co-parenting, particularly co-parenting with high conflict people and folks with personality disorders that can affect the co-parenting relationship. I know we've talked about that a lot in prior episodes. I thought it was great having sort of Mr. Eddy on to give his perspective as a mental health professional. And for those of y'all who remember, is actually a licensed lawyer as well. I love all his presentations. I love all his books. I recommend his books to our clients. I recommend his seminars to our clients. Anything that he does, I think, is phenomenal. And so it really was great having him on the podcast with us. So that's it for, I think covering, if I'm thinking back on kind of recent episodes, those are some of my favorite ones. Let's talk about some trending topics that are coming up, Brian, that we're going to be addressing in future episodes. So I'll take sort of the first couple that come to mind. I know we're going to be talking about no-fault divorces. We get a lot of questions about that. Not to completely delve into it right now, but we get a lot of questions from clients. Brian, you and I were just fielding this question, I think, just last week from a client with a very complex and contentious divorce, asking about alleging cruelty and adultery in a divorce versus just alleging a no-fault divorce. What does it mean when we say no-fault divorce, which is actually not a legal term? We call it insupportability in the state of Texas. And then what impact does it have on a divorce if we allege fault grounds for the divorce? And so we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode. And then another popular topic that we get a lot of questions on is cryptocurrency and how that plays out in a divorce. Obviously, it's an asset that has to be dealt with in a divorce and can be a very difficult asset to track down and make sure that we're covering all our bases on that. So we'll talk about the various experts that we work with on that and the experience that we have. And then, Brian, I guess, can you give us a brief overview? We're going to be talking about relocation issues and I think graying divorces, or what we call gray divorces.
Right.
What's the kind of brief overview and preview on those?
Yeah. So relocation is when you're living somewhere with your kids after you split up, or maybe before you split up, and one of the parents wants to move with the children to another area. So let's say you're both in Dallas and you're going to divorce, and the mom would like to move back to Arkansas, where they came from. This is a really difficult issue. The law's actually changed a lot, not so much what's statutory, but the way judges think about it a lot in the past several decades. So, and it's one of those few issues that I think there's sometimes just no way to settle it. You've just got to go to trial. There are not that many like that, I think, in family law, but this is one of them. So we're going to do that with Ryan and Carson, who are partners in our firm as well. That's should be an interesting one. And then gray divorces, those are, older. I typically say 65 and up divorces. There's no exact definition of gray, but typically retirement age. It used to be fairly rare. It's become more common. And there's a lot of different issues around that. Typically not children. There might be, but generally not. It's generally more about retirement and income and those kind of things. So we're going to cover both of those, since we get a lot of questions about that and a lot of cases involving that.
Yeah, those are just briefly. Those can be some of the harder divorces to deal with, because people at retirement age, a lot of times it's rare that you plan for your retirement with half your assets gone through a divorce, and it's rare that people take that contingency into consideration. It can be difficult, but certainly something that we deal with and help people manage and guide them through that. And then coming up on the podcast, we'll continue in our pop culture series. We're going to be dealing with parental alienation and a pop culture story that addresses parental alienation. For those of y'all who listen to our podcast know that parental alienation is a topic that we talk about a lot on this, and bring in various experts to help us manage those topics and give us some expert advice. We're going to be doing a parental alienation podcast that interplays with a pop culture story that's in the news. And then we have some special guests that are going to be speaking. I know actually before this episode airs, I think we're going to have, or we will have had, Jamie, and I'm going to mispronounce Jamie's name. I mispronounce it when we record the podcast, but Jamie Strimgauer, who is the host of the Kick-Ass Stepmom podcast. For those of y'all who missed that podcast, go back in time and a few episodes before this one. It's one of my favorites that we've done recently. My wife, Sarah, who's the CEO of our law firm and a stepmom herself, joined us in that episode. And I thought those two women had a lot to offer our listeners, particularly when it comes to the topic of blended families. Brian, I think you have a podcast coming up with Olivia St. Clair, who's the founder and principal of attorney of the Long firm in Illinois, who focuses on high conflict divorces. And then I recently recorded an episode, I think will be broadcast after this one, Sammy Jo Allen, who is a marriage and family therapist in the Dallas area, who really had a lot of insights to offer, both for people that are thinking about divorce or working on their marriage and trying to salvage their marriage, and for people that have gone the marriage counseling route, but are going to be separating, potentially going through a divorce. She continues to work with those individuals through the process to try to help them manage it in a way that has the least amount of impact on their family system and, of course, the children. So those will be coming up. So tune in, or I guess for Jamie's episode, it will be shortly before this one, but those will be coming up. So make sure to tune in. And then let's just sort of briefly, before we wrap up, let's handle a couple of listener questions. So, Brian, one's a pretty straightforward one, but we get it a lot. What are the residency requirements for filing for divorce in Texas?
Yeah, the short answer is someone, usually both of the folks in a marriage have to be, usually the practical is that both people live in Texas. But if it just takes one of you to live here for 6 months, there's a lot of details around that about what is a resident, were you really living here? What if just one of you came and the other stayed behind? There's some issues around that. But the short answer for 99% of the people is you have to be in Texas for 6 months.
Right. And then as far as county, I think it's 90 days for county, 6 months in Texas.
Right.
And then I've told plenty of war stories of people having differences of opinions as to where their domicile is and where their residency is. And of course, people could have multiple residences. So that can lead to some interesting both jurisdictional and venue fights. So always important to consult with somebody on that. Although, just briefly, although I don't know why this pops into mind. I think, Brian, you and I had a case, if you remember, it was Guadalupe County, where literally the property line or the county line went through these folks' house. If you remember that case, that was back in 2017, I think. Literally, if you're in the living room, you're in one county, and if you're in the kitchen, you're in the other county.
Right.
I've never seen that before.
Funny. Yeah.
And I don't think I've seen that again. Okay. Somebody asked, does an attorney's strategy on a case change when opposing party exhibits narcissistic behavior? I'll answer this one. I'd say yes and no. I think you should always approach a case hoping not the case, but assuming the other side is not going to be cooperative or your best friend on the case. All these cases, we hope, stay out of the court system. All these cases, you hope, resolve amicably. Most do. Even if there is some push back and forth between the two sides, most cases do resolve. But you always have to plan for the contingency that somebody is not going to be cooperative, that somebody's going to be behave as if they have a personality disorder. A lot of times they do. We've talked about this in other podcasts. A lot of times if people are involved in litigation, it's because one side or both has a personality disorder. And so you always need to approach the case where you're hoping for it going smoothly, but you're protecting your client as if the other side is not going to be cooperative and behave in a way that's very selfish and narcissistic. And you just have to prepare for that contingency and hope for the best. Brian, here's kind of a quick legal question, and then we'll wrap up with maybe one more. Can I get my family law case transferred to a different county in Texas?
I think you and I could go on for 15 minutes about this one, but I'll make it quick. Generally, you cannot, right? Just because you don't like the judge or don't like the people in the county, that's not a good enough reason. There are some specific rules around it about child custody modifications, for example, that are based on where the child has been living in the past 6 months or so. There's some other rules when the case could be in more than one county and the court could potentially move it between them. But generally speaking, 99% of the cases you're going to be in the county where people are living and it's going to stay there.
Yeah, I agree. Let me answer two quick child support questions, and actually we'll do one last one, which will also be brief. So one person asked, how does child support calculation and enforcement vary between different counties in Texas? So child support calculation, talked about this previous episodes. We have guideline child support in the state of Texas. We have a cap on child support where eventually a obligor's income hits a certain amount to where his or her child support would be capped. Different judges, though, do apply those because can apply these differently because these are guidelines. The court can go through the cap for particular situations. So it is judge specific. It's important to know how judges in your county handle the guideline child support. Some judges just, every single case, doesn't matter what the situation is. They do guideline child support. Some judges, it doesn't matter what the net resources are for the obligor. They always do cap child support. They never go above the cap. Every single case is different. Every single judge is different. So it's really important to know your judge. Enforcement, the same, right? The family code, the rules on enforcement are the same. They're uniform throughout the state of Texas. How a judge applies those rules depends on the judge because she is going to have some discretion on what remedies she uses in enforcing child support. And then somebody asked about modifying child support. If your financial situation changes after divorce, the answer to that is yes, you can, but it involves a modification. And then lastly, Brian, can you talk about, because we've actually recorded an episode recently on this, do you ever take a case with step-parent rights?
Yeah, and I would refer folks to that episode. Maybe we can put the link to it in there. But generally speaking, step-parents don't have much in the way of rights. So have we ever taken any cases? Yes, but it's a difficult route to go under the law as it currently is in Texas.
Right. Well, those are some quick questions that we're able to address. We love it when y'all send in questions. You can always do that by emailing us at podcast@waltersgilbreath.com. That's what we'll handle for today for our 100th episode. Again, we really appreciate y'all tuning in. We want to keep doing this podcast. We want to keep improving it. So if you like what you've heard today, please do us a favor and leave us a review. We appreciate all the feedback that we've gotten throughout the tenure of this podcast. We want to keep getting feedback from y'all, so please feel free to email. Again, that's podcast@waltersgilbreath.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jake Gilbreath, joined by Brian Walters, and we'll see you on the next episode.
For information about the topics covered in today's episode and more, you can visit our website at waltersgilbreath.com. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of For Better, Worse, or Divorce, where we post new episodes every first and third Wednesday. Do you have a topic you want discussed or a question for our hosts? Email us at podcast@waltersgilbreath.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time.